What if residents of Bartlett found photos of a child identical to a girl today, taken in 1922? What if the name on the back matched perfectly, written in handwriting that never changed? What if every detail, every birthmark, every expression was impossible to explain? What if time itself had left evidence that should never exist? Before we go further, subscribe now so you never miss another American mystery that refuses to stay buried. Bartlett sits quiet in the Nebraska plains, a town where everyone knows everyone, where families have lived for generations, where the past feels closer than tomorrow. The streets are wide and empty most days, lined with brick buildings that remember when this place mattered, when trains stopped here, when children played in yards that still stand today. It's the kind of town where nothing changes, where time moves slow, where people trust what they see because there's never been a reason not to. But in a place this small, this still, this rooted in routine, the impossible becomes harder to ignore when it finally arrives. And in Bartlett, it arrived in a cardboard box that had been sitting in an attic for 70 years, untouched, unopened, waiting. The box belonged to the Harlow family, descendants of one of Bartlett's founding settlers, people whose names appear on every town record going back to 1882. When Margaret Harlow died at 93, her granddaughter Claire came to sort through the old farmhouse, a job nobody wanted but somebody had to do. The attic smelled like dust and mothballs, floorboards creaking under her weight, light slicing through gaps in the wood, illuminating decades of forgotten things. She found the box behind a trunk, sealed with tape that had gone brittle and brown, labeled in faded ink that simply read, Emma, 1922. Claire didn't recognize the name, didn't know who Emma was, but she opened it anyway, expecting old letters, maybe a few trinkets, nothing that would matter now. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, black and white, edges worn soft with age, each one showing the same little girl. She wore dresses from another era, boots that laced high, hair pinned back in styles Claire had only seen in history books. The girl stood in front of Bartlett's old church, sat on the steps of the schoolhouse, played near the creek that still runs behind Main Street. Every photo was labeled on the back in careful handwriting, dates and locations noted with precision that felt deliberate, almost obsessive. Emma Harlow, age 7, June 1922. Emma Harlow, age 8, September 1923. The girl's face was clear in every shot, eyes staring straight into the camera, expression serious, unsmiling like she knew something the photographer didn't. Claire brought the photos downstairs, spread them across the kitchen table, studied each one under the afternoon light streaming through the window. She pulled out her phone, opened her photo album, scrolled to pictures from her daughter's 7th birthday party just 3 months ago, and then she stopped breathing. Her daughter Lily, 7 years old, dark curly hair, wide-set eyes, small birthmark just above her left eyebrow, looked exactly like the girl in the 1922 photographs. Not similar, not reminiscent, not a family resemblance you could explain away with genetics and coincidence. Identical. The same face, the same expression, the same everything, separated by 103 years. Claire held her phone next to a photo from 1922, comparing every detail, every line, every feature, hoping to find some difference that would make this make sense. The birthmark was there, in the exact same place, the same small dark spot that Lily had always had, that doctors said was just a harmless mark. The curve of the eyebrows matched perfectly, the shape of the chin, the way the ears sat slightly uneven, details too specific to be random. She called her husband Tom, told him to come home now, didn't explain why, just said it was important. When he walked in and saw the photos spread across the table, saw Claire's face pale and tight with something between fear and disbelief, he didn't ask questions, he just looked. Tom picked up the oldest photo, the one labeled Emma Harlow, age 7, June 1922, and held it next to his phone showing Lily at her birthday party. He set them down, walked to the window, stared out at nothing for a long moment, then came back and looked again. "This isn't possible," he said, but his voice was flat, empty of conviction, because the evidence was right there, undeniable, staring back at them. They checked every photo in the box, 23 in total, spanning from 1922 to 1929, each one showing Emma growing older, changing slightly, but always recognizably the same child. And in every single one, she looked like Lily, like their daughter who was born in 2018, who had never existed before that day. But that was only the beginning of what they would find in that box. Claire started going through the other items, pulling out old letters, a small leather journal, a wooden toy horse carved by hand, a ribbon that had faded to almost white. The journal was filled with entries written in the same careful handwriting as the photo labels, dated from 1921 to 1929, chronicling the daily life of a child growing up in rural Nebraska. Emma wrote about school, about chores, about her father's farm, about summers that felt endless and winters that froze everything solid. She wrote about friends whose families still lived in Bartlett, names Claire recognized from the hardware store, the post office, the diner on Main Street. Nothing in the entries seemed strange or unusual, just the ordinary thoughts of an ordinary child living an ordinary life in a small American town. Until Claire reached the entry dated November 14, 1929, the last one in the journal, written 3 days before Emma's 15th birthday. "I saw her again today," Emma wrote. "The woman who looks like mother but isn't, who stands at the edge of the field and watches me. She's been coming since summer, always at dusk, always wearing clothes I don't recognize, strange and modern and wrong. She never speaks, never comes closer, just watches with eyes that feel like they're looking through time itself. Papa says I'm imagining things, that grief makes us see what isn't there. But I know what I see. And today, she smiled at me, and I understood something terrible and true." The entry ended there. No explanation, no follow-up, just blank pages after that final sentence. Claire searched the box for more information, anything that would explain what happened to Emma, why the journal stopped so abruptly. She found a newspaper clipping from November 1929, yellowed and fragile, reporting that Emma Harlow, age 14, had disappeared from her family's farm on the night of November 17th. No trace was ever found, no evidence of foul play, no indication of where she might have gone. The article quoted her father saying she'd been acting strange for months, talking about seeing things that weren't there, becoming withdrawn and fearful. The search lasted 3 weeks before being called off. Emma declared a runaway, her name slowly forgotten as the years passed, and new tragedies took her place. Claire felt something cold settle in her chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with temperature, and everything to do with the realization that she was holding evidence of something that defied every natural law she'd ever trusted. She went back to the photos, looked at Emma's face again, at those serious, unsmiling eyes that seemed to hold knowledge no child should possess, and she noticed something she'd missed before, something that made her hands start shaking. In the background of several photos, barely visible, easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention, was a figure standing at a distance, blurred and indistinct, watching Emma. The figure appeared in 5 different photographs taken over 3 years, always in the background, always at the edge of the frame, always watching. Claire got a magnifying glass, examined each appearance closely, trying to make out details in the grainy black and white images. The figure was a woman, that much was clear, wearing what looked like modern clothing completely out of place in 1920s Nebraska. In one photo from 1927, the woman's face was slightly more visible, just enough to see the shape of her features, the way she held herself, the angle of her head. And Claire recognized her. It was Margaret Harlow, her grandmother, the woman whose death had led to this discovery, photographed in the 1920s wearing clothes from the 1980s. Tom took the photos to the Historical Society, asked if anyone knew the story of Emma Harlow, if there were records that might explain what happened. The librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy, whose family had been in Bartlett since the 1890s, remembered hearing about Emma as a child, remembered her own grandmother mentioning the disappearance. "They said she went mad," Dorothy explained, pulling out old town records, birth certificates, death certificates, census data. "Said she started seeing things that weren't there, talking to people who didn't exist. Her father thought she was possessed, back when people still believed in such things. After she vanished, the family never spoke of her again, like she'd never existed at all. But Emma had existed, the photos proved that, and she'd looked exactly like Lily, which proved something far more disturbing." Tom asked Dorothy if she'd ever heard the name Margaret Harlow, if it appeared in any records connected to Emma's family. Dorothy checked, flipping through decade-old ledgers, running her finger down columns of names written in fading ink. "Margaret Harlow," she said slowly, "born 1931, 2 years after Emma disappeared. She was Emma's niece, daughter of Emma's older brother William. Lived in Bartlett her whole life. Died just last month. That's whose house you're clearing out, isn't it? Claire and Tom drove back to the farmhouse in silence, both trying to process what they'd learned, both failing to find an explanation that made sense. Margaret had been born 2 years after Emma disappeared, had grown up never knowing her aunt, had lived a completely normal life in the same town where her aunt had vanished under mysterious circumstances. But somehow, Margaret had appeared in photographs from the 1920s, standing in the background watching Emma, wearing clothes that wouldn't exist for another 50 years. And Emma had written about seeing a woman who looked like her mother but wasn't, a woman who appeared at dusk who smiled as if she understood something terrible and true. That night Claire couldn't sleep, kept thinking about the journal entry, about Emma's words, about what it meant to see someone who was looking through time itself. She went to Lily's room, watched her daughter sleeping peacefully, face relaxed and innocent, completely unaware that her face had existed 100 years before she was born. Claire wanted to believe it was coincidence, wanted to find some rational explanation, but the evidence was too specific, too precise, too impossible to dismiss. She thought about waking Tom, telling him they needed to destroy the photos, burn the journal, forget everything they'd found. But she knew it wouldn't matter, knew that what they'd discovered was already set in motion, already part of a pattern they couldn't escape. The next morning, Claire decided to look through the rest of Margaret's belongings, searching for anything else that might connect to Emma, to the photographs, to whatever impossible thing was happening. In Margaret's bedroom, she found a locked drawer in the old oak dresser, forced it open with a screwdriver, discovered it was full of more photographs. These were in color, taken with modern cameras, dated from the 1980s and 1990s, showing Margaret at various ages, living her life in Bartlett. But mixed in with the normal family photos were others, strange ones that made Claire's breath catch in her throat. There were photos of Bartlett's Main Street from different eras, same buildings, but different details, cars from the wrong decades, people wearing clothes that didn't match the dates written on the back. There were photos of the farmhouse taken from impossible angles, from positions where no one could have stood, showing rooms that didn't exist anymore, furniture that had been sold or burned decades ago. And there were photos of a little girl who looked exactly like Emma, exactly like Lily, taken in 2015, 3 years before Lily was born, showing her playing in the same yard where Emma had played in 1922. Claire spread these photos next to the ones from 1922, creating a timeline that made no sense, that violated every principle of linear time she'd ever understood. Emma, in 1922, looking like Lily. Margaret appearing in 1920s photos while wearing 1980s clothes. A child identical to both of them photographed in 2015, before Lily existed. And underneath all these photos, at the bottom of the drawer, Claire found a letter, sealed in an envelope, addressed to whoever finds this, written in handwriting she now recognized as Margaret's. The letter was dated 2023, just 2 years before Margaret's death, written in a shaking hand that suggested age and urgency. "I don't expect you to believe what I'm about to tell you," it began, "but I've spent my entire life trying to understand it, and I've failed. When I was a child, I started having dreams about a girl named Emma, my father's sister who disappeared before I was born. In the dreams, I was standing in fields, watching her, unable to speak or move closer, just watching as she lived her life in a time that wasn't mine. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that I started to believe they were memories, but memories of things that happened before I existed." Margaret's letter continued, explaining that as she grew older, the dreams became more frequent, more detailed, more disturbing. She began to recognize places from the dreams in real Bartlett, streets and buildings and fields that matched exactly what she saw at night. She started researching Emma's disappearance, reading old newspaper articles, talking to elderly relatives who remembered the story, trying to understand why this long dead aunt haunted her so completely. And then, in 1985, when Margaret was 54 years old, something impossible happened. She was walking past the old field behind her childhood home, the same field Emma had written about in her journal, and she saw herself standing there, watching, wearing the exact clothes she had on, looking exactly as she looked in that moment. "I stood there for what felt like hours," Margaret wrote, "staring at myself, at this other version of me that existed in the same moment but couldn't be real. And then I understood. I was the woman Emma had seen. The woman in the photographs from the 1920s. Somehow, in ways I still don't understand, I had been pulled back to that time, watching events that happened before I was born, witnessing my own aunt's life from a distance I couldn't cross. And I realized that if I was there, if I could appear in a time that wasn't mine, then Emma might appear in a time that wasn't hers. The letter explained that Margaret had spent the next 40 years documenting everything, taking photographs, keeping records, trying to create evidence that would prove what was happening. She photographed moments when she felt time slipping, when the present seemed to overlap with the past, when she saw things that shouldn't be there. She took pictures of children who looked like Emma, searching for signs that her aunt was still somewhere in the pattern, still existing in moments scattered across decades. And in 2015, she photographed a little girl at the town fair who looked exactly like Emma, exactly like the niece she'd never met. And she knew that the pattern was continuing, that whatever force had connected her to Emma was now connecting Emma to someone new. If you're reading this, Margaret's letter concluded, then you've found the photographs and you've seen what I've seen. You probably have a daughter, and she probably looks like Emma, like all of us who get caught in this pattern. I don't know why it happens, don't know what force pulls us across time, don't know if we're ghosts in each other's lives or something stranger still, but I know this. Emma didn't run away in 1929. She disappeared because she finally understood what I understood standing in that field in 1985. She saw herself, saw the pattern, saw the truth that we're all echoes of each other, existing in moments that touch across decades we'll never fully understand. Claire set the letter down, hands trembling, mind racing through implications she didn't want to accept. She thought about Lily, about her daughter's face that had existed in 1922, about the birthmark that marked all of them across time, about what it meant to be part of a pattern you never chose. She thought about Emma's journal, about the woman who watched from the edge of fields, about Margaret understanding something terrible and true. And she thought about what would happen when Lily got older, when she started having dreams about girls who looked like her, when she saw herself standing in places she'd never been, watching lives she'd never lived. Tom found her in Margaret's room, surrounded by photographs spanning 100 years, all showing the same face appearing and reappearing across time. He sat down beside her, picked up Margaret's letter, read it slowly, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief to a kind of hollow acceptance. "What do we tell Lily?" he asked finally. And Claire didn't have an answer, because how do you tell a 7-year-old that her face exists in 1922, that she's part of a pattern that transcends normal time, that someday she might stand in a field and see herself watching from another decade? They decided to keep the photographs, to preserve Margaret's records, to document everything as it happened, just as Margaret had done. Claire started a journal of her own, writing down dates when Lily seemed distracted, when she talked about dreams that felt too real, when she mentioned seeing things that shouldn't be there. She photographed Lily in the same locations where Emma had been photographed, creating a new set of images that would one day sit in another box, waiting for another descendant to discover. And she waited, watching her daughter grow, looking for signs that the pattern was continuing, that time was starting to slip. Months passed, then a year, and nothing unusual happened. Lily grew normally, played normally, lived the ordinary life of a small-town American child. Claire began to hope that maybe the pattern had ended, that maybe Margaret's death had broken whatever connection existed across decades. But then one evening in October, just as the sun was setting and the light was turning golden across the fields, Lily came running into the house, excited and confused, talking about the woman she'd seen standing at the edge of the property. "She looked like Grandma Margaret," Lily said, "but younger, and she was wearing old-fashioned clothes, like from those pictures you showed me. She was just standing there watching me play, and when I waved at her she smiled, but it was a sad smile, like she knew something I didn't. And then she was gone, just vanished, like she was never there at all." Claire felt her heart stop, felt the cold certainty of recognition, felt the pattern clicking into place. She asked Lily to describe exactly what the woman was wearing, and Lily's description matched perfectly with one of the photographs from 1922, one showing a young woman in a simple dress, standing at the edge of a field, watching Emma play. Claire went to the field that evening, stood where Lily said she'd seen the woman, looked across the empty expanse of grass turning brown with autumn. She took out her phone, opened the photo album, found the 1922 picture, held it up to compare the background with where she stood now. The angle was exactly right. The perspective perfect. The field unchanged, despite 100 years of seasons. She took a photograph of the empty field, capturing nothing but grass and sky and fading light. But when she looked at the image on her phone screen, there was a figure in the background, blurred and barely visible, standing exactly where Claire stood now, watching something in a time that wasn't Claire's. That night, Claire couldn't stop thinking about Emma's final journal entry, about seeing someone who looks through time itself, about understanding something terrible and true. She thought about Margaret standing in a field in 1985, seeing herself watching from another moment, realizing she was the ghost in her aunt's life. She thought about Lily seeing a young woman in old-fashioned clothes, not knowing she was seeing her own future, her own face looking back across decades. And she understood what Emma had understood in 1929, what Margaret had understood in 1985, what she herself was understanding now. The pattern wasn't about traveling through time or changing the past or altering events. It was about existing in multiple moments simultaneously, about being present in times that weren't supposed to touch, about seeing yourself scattered across decades like reflections in broken mirrors. Emma hadn't disappeared because she'd run away or been taken or met with tragedy. She'd disappeared because she'd finally seen the full pattern, seen all the versions of herself existing across time, and she'd stepped into it completely, becoming the woman who watches from edges of fields, the figure in backgrounds of photographs, the presence that appears at dusk in lives not yet lived. Claire made a decision that night, one that felt inevitable and necessary and terrifying. She gathered all the photographs, all the journals, all the letters, everything that documented the pattern across 100 years. She sealed them in a new box, stronger than the one she'd found in Margaret's attic, labeled it carefully with dates and names and instructions. She wrote her own letter, explaining everything she'd learned, everything she'd understood, everything she'd experienced. And she put it all in a place where Lily would find it someday, when she was older, when the dreams started, when she began seeing women in fields wearing clothes from the wrong decades. "You'll understand when the time comes," Claire wrote in her letter to Lily. "And when you do, you'll have a choice to make. You can try to resist it, try to stay grounded in one time, one moment, one version of yourself. Or you can accept it, step into the pattern, become part of the echo that exists across decades." Margaret chose to document it, to preserve evidence, to leave clues for whoever came next. Emma chose to disappear into it, to become the watching figure, to exist in the spaces between moments. I don't know what choice you'll make, but I know you'll make it, because we all do, eventually. But the truth is more complicated than choices or patterns or echoes across time. The truth is that in a small town in Nebraska, where families have lived for generations and the past feels closer than tomorrow, something has been happening for over 100 years that no one can explain. It started with Emma Harlow in 1922, or maybe it started before that, with women whose photographs were never found, whose journals were destroyed, whose stories were forgotten. It continued through Margaret, through Claire, through Lily, and it will continue through girls not yet born, faces that will appear in photographs from decades already past. The pattern exists, undeniable and impossible, documented in boxes hidden in attics, in journals locked in drawers, in letters addressed to whoever finds this. And here's what makes it impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss as coincidence or family resemblance or tricks of light and memory. In 2024, a woman named Sarah Chen moved to Bartlett from California, had never heard of the Harlows, had no connection to the town's history. She was sorting through old photographs at an estate sale, found a box labeled Emma 1922, bought it for $5 without looking inside. When she opened it later, she found the same photographs Claire had found, the same journal, the same evidence of a girl who looked exactly like Sarah's daughter Maya, born in 2019, living in California until their move to Nebraska. Sarah contacted Claire, showed her the photographs, asked if this made any sense, if there was any explanation, and Claire showed Sarah her own collection, Margaret's collection, all the evidence spanning a century. They compared their daughters' faces, saw the same birthmark above the left eyebrow, the same serious expression, the same everything. They compared journal entries, found the same descriptions of women watching from field edges, the same dreams, the same slow realization of patterns existing across time. And they understood together what Emma and Margaret had understood alone, that this wasn't about one family or one bloodline or one town, but about something larger, something that chose girls randomly and connected them across decades for reasons no one would ever fully comprehend. Bartlett sits quiet in the Nebraska plains, a town where everyone knows everyone, where the past feels closer than tomorrow, where impossible things exist in boxes hidden in attics. The streets are still wide and empty. The brick buildings still remember when this place mattered. Children still play in yards that have stood for over a century. Nothing seems to change here. Nothing seems to disturb the slow passage of seasons and years. But underneath the ordinary surface, underneath the normal rhythm of small-town American life, there's a pattern, ancient and ongoing, pulling girls across time, creating echoes that exist in photographs that shouldn't be possible. Emma Harlow disappeared in 1929, stepped into a pattern she couldn't resist, became the woman who watches from the edges of fields in times not her own. Margaret Harlow spent her life documenting the pattern, preserving evidence, leaving clues for those who would come after. Claire discovered the truth in an attic, saw her daughter's face in photographs from 1922, understood what it meant to be part of something impossible. Sarah found the same truth at an estate sale, bought it for $5, brought it home to a daughter who doesn't yet know her face has existed for over 100 years. And Lily plays in yards where Emma once played, dreams that might be memories from times before she was born, sees women standing at dusk who smile with knowledge of something terrible and true. She doesn't understand yet, doesn't know what her mother knows, doesn't realize she's part of an echo that spans decades. But she will someday when she's older, when she stands in a field and sees herself watching from another moment, when she reads the letters left for her, when she makes the choice that Emma and Margaret and all the others made before her. The pattern continues, undeniable and impossible, documented but unexplained, visible to those who find the photographs and invisible to everyone else. In small towns across America, in attics and basements and locked drawers, there are boxes waiting to be found, photographs waiting to be seen, evidence waiting to prove that time isn't linear, that faces repeat across decades, that some mysteries exist not to be solved but to be witnessed. Bartlett is just one town, Emma just one girl, the Harlows just one family. But the pattern is everywhere, choosing girls randomly, connecting them impossibly, creating a network of echoes across time that no one controls and no one understands. If you live in a small town, if you have a daughter, if you find old photographs in attics, pay attention to the faces, look for birthmarks above left eyebrows. Notice if backgrounds contain figures that shouldn't be there. Check your family history for girls who disappeared, for women who talked about seeing things that weren't there, for journals that end abruptly with entries about understanding something terrible and true. The pattern might already include you, might already have pulled your daughter's face into photographs from decades before she was born. And if it has, you'll find the evidence eventually, hidden in places you haven't looked yet, waiting for you to discover what others discovered before you. But here's what the letters don't say, what Margaret never wrote down, what Claire is only beginning to understand. The pattern doesn't just pull girls across time randomly, doesn't just create echoes without purpose. It's building towards something, accumulating faces and moments and connections across decades, creating a network that grows stronger with each generation. Every girl who sees herself in another time, every woman who becomes a watching figure in someone else's photographs, every mother who finds evidence in attics adds to the pattern, strengthens the connection, moves whatever force drives this closer to some conclusion no one can predict. Emma understood this in 1929, saw not just her own echo across time but the echo of all the girls who would come after her, all the faces that would appear in photographs from the wrong decades, all the women who would stand in fields watching lives they never lived. That's what made her disappear. Not fear or madness or despair, but the weight of understanding something too large to carry alone. She stepped into the pattern completely, became part of its structure, chose to exist in the spaces between moments rather than stay trapped in one time, one life, one version of herself. And maybe that's what they all choose eventually, when the pattern becomes too clear to ignore, when the dreams become too real to dismiss, when they see themselves scattered across decades like pieces of a puzzle they never asked to solve. Maybe disappearing isn't tragedy but transformation, not loss but expansion, not an ending but a different kind of existence. Maybe Emma is still here, still watching from field edges, still appearing in photographs, still existing in all the moments the pattern touches. Maybe Margaret joined her, and maybe Claire will too, and maybe Lily, and maybe Sarah's daughter Maya, and maybe girls not yet born whose faces are already waiting in photographs from times they'll never live. The box Claire sealed and hid for Lily to find someday contains more than just photographs and journals and letters. It contains a choice, an invitation, a door into something that exists beyond normal time. Lily will open it one day, read the evidence, see her own face staring back from 1922, and she'll understand what her mother understood, what Margaret understood, what Emma understood. And she'll have to decide if she wants to resist the pattern or accept it, if she wants to stay in one moment or exist in many, if she wants to remain fully present in the time she was born into or become part of the echo that spans decades. No one knows what happens to the girls who choose to step fully into the pattern, who disappear like Emma disappeared, who become watching figures in other people's photographs. No one knows if they exist in some space outside normal time, if they experience all moments simultaneously, if they're conscious of what they've become, or if they're just echoes, reflections without awareness, images that appear and vanish without thought or choice. The letters don't say, the journals don't explain. The photographs only show them standing at distances, watching, never speaking, never coming closer. But here's what makes this impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away as coincidence or madness or elaborate hoax. The photographs are real, tested by experts, dated accurately, showing no signs of manipulation or fraud. The handwriting in the journals matches across decades, written by different hands but connected by the same precise style, the same careful attention to detail. The birthmark appears in every face, same location, same size, same small dark spot above the left eyebrow. The pattern is documented, preserved, undeniable, existing in multiple collections owned by people who never met each other, who found the evidence independently, who recognized the same truth from different angles. Scientists would call it impossible, historians would call it fabricated, psychologists would call it shared delusion, but the mothers who find photographs of their daughters taken before those daughters were born, who see the same birthmark in images from 1922, who read journals describing their own lives written decades before they lived them, they know what they're holding is real. They know that something exists beyond the normal flow of time, something that chooses certain faces and repeats them across decades, something that pulls girls into a pattern they never asked to join. And the most terrifying part isn't the impossibility of it, isn't the violation of every natural law, isn't the evidence that time doesn't work the way we thought it did. The most terrifying part is that the pattern is accelerating, choosing girls more frequently, creating echoes closer together, building towards something that feels inevitable. Emma in 1922, Margaret seeing Emma in dreams starting in the 1930s, Claire's daughter born in 2018, Sarah's daughter born in 2019, and now reports from other towns, other states, other mothers, finding photographs and journals and letters describing the same pattern, the same birthmark, the same impossible faces appearing in times they never lived. Something is gathering momentum, pulling more girls into the pattern, creating a network that spans not just decades but centuries, not just one town but dozens, not just one family but hundreds. And no one knows what happens when the pattern reaches some critical mass, when enough girls have been pulled across time, when enough echoes exist in enough moments. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe it just continues forever, adding new faces to old photographs, new dreams to old patterns. Or maybe something shifts, maybe time itself changes. Maybe all the moments that have been touching across decades finally collapse into each other, creating something new, something impossible, something no one can predict. Claire thinks about this late at night when she can't sleep, when she listens to Lily breathing softly in the next room, when she looks at photographs of her daughter's face in 1922 and wonders what she's preserved for future generations to find. She thinks about sealing the box and hiding the evidence, about breaking the pattern by destroying all the photographs, all the journals, all the letters. But she knows it wouldn't matter, knows the pattern exists beyond the documentation, knows that other mothers in other towns have their own collections, their own evidence, their own daughters whose faces appear in photographs from the wrong decades. The pattern is bigger than any one person's choice to preserve or destroy evidence. It exists in the faces themselves, in the birthmarks that mark each girl, in the dreams that pull them across time, in the moments when they see themselves watching from other decades. Destroying the photographs wouldn't stop Lily from having dreams about Emma, wouldn't prevent her from seeing Margaret standing in fields wearing old-fashioned clothes, wouldn't keep her from eventually understanding something terrible and true. The evidence just makes it easier to understand, easier to accept, easier to make the choice when the time comes. So Claire keeps the box sealed and hidden, keeps writing in her journal, keeps documenting the moments when Lily seems distracted or mentions dreams that feel too real. She takes photographs of her daughter in the same locations where Emma was photographed, creating a new layer of evidence for whoever comes next. She writes letters to mothers she'll never meet, explaining what she's learned, warning them what to look for, preparing them for the choice their daughters will eventually have to make. And she waits, watching the pattern continue, watching her daughter grow, watching for the moment when everything shifts and the impossible becomes undeniable. That moment came on a cold November evening, exactly 95 years after Emma disappeared, when Lily was playing in the field behind the house and suddenly stopped, frozen, staring at something Claire couldn't see. Claire ran outside, called her daughter's name, but Lily didn't respond, didn't move, just stood perfectly still with an expression Claire recognized from Emma's photographs, from Margaret's descriptions, from her own nightmares. And then Lily turned slowly, looked at Claire with eyes that seemed to be looking through her through time itself, and smiled a sad smile that held understanding of something terrible and true. "I see them all now," Lily said quietly, voice calm and certain in a way that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "All the girls with my face, all the moments where we exist, all the times that touch each other. Emma is here, and Margaret, and so many others whose names I don't know yet. They're all here, have always been here, waiting for me to understand." Claire felt her heart breaking and mending simultaneously, felt the weight of the pattern settling onto her daughter's small shoulders, felt the moment of transformation that she'd known would come but hoped would wait until Lily was older, stronger, more prepared. But the pattern doesn't wait for preparation, doesn't care about age or readiness or a mother's desperate hope that her daughter can stay innocent just a little longer. It chooses its moment, pulls girls across time when the conditions are right, when the connection is strongest, when understanding arrives whether anyone is ready for it or not. Lily stood in that field as the sun set, as the light turned golden across grass turning brown with winter approaching, and she saw what Emma saw in 1929, what Margaret saw in 1985, what all the others saw when the pattern finally revealed itself completely. Claire didn't try to pull her daughter back, didn't try to break the connection or deny what was happening. She just stood there, watching, documenting with her phone's camera, preserving this moment for the letters she would write, for the journal entries that would join all the others in boxes hidden in attics. She photographed Lily standing motionless in the field, photographed the empty space beside her where the watching figures existed in times Claire couldn't access, photographed the moment her daughter stepped fully into a pattern that had been building for over 100 years. And when Lily finally moved again, when she turned away from whatever she'd been seeing and walked back toward the house, she was different, changed in ways Claire recognized from Margaret's letters, from Emma's final journal entry. She was still Lily, still 7 years old, still Claire's daughter, but she was also something more now, something that existed across decades, something that could see moments touching each other across time. She'd become part of the echo, part of the pattern, part of the impossible truth that some faces exist in multiple times simultaneously, connected by forces no one understands. Mysteries don't always end when you find the answers, and some truths are bigger than the evidence that proves them. So subscribe to discover the next story that time forgot to keep hidden.